The morning started like any other Saturday at my small commercial property. Quiet, peaceful, giving me a chance to catch up on paperwork before the weekend rush of customers. My business, Phoenix Auto Detailing, relied heavily on weekend traffic, and I had just invested in resurfacing our entire parking lot the previous month. Looking out my office window, I enjoyed the stillness with my coffee, mentally preparing for the busy day ahead. That tranquility shattered when I heard what sounded like festive music. Confused, I walked to the front of my building and froze in disbelief. My entire parking lot had been transformed into what appeared to be a full-blown neighborhood block party. Dozens of cars filled every available space. Colorful banners stretched between light posts. Tables laden with food formed rows along one side, and a bouncy castle occupied the corner nearest to the adjacent residential development. For a moment, I stood paralyzed, trying to process this bewildering scene. Children laughed as they ran between cars. Adults chatted in clusters holding plastic cups, and someone had even set up a DJ booth near the entrance. Every single customer parking space, all 28 of them, had been appropriated for this unauthorized gathering. I approached the nearest group, working to keep my voice level despite my rising blood pressure. "Excuse me, but this is private property. Who authorized this event in my parking lot?" A woman in a floral dress looked at me with mild confusion. "The HOA approved it. This is our annual spring block party." She gestured vaguely toward the residential area behind my property. "Are you new to the neighborhood? The invitation went to all Maple Creek residents." "I am not a resident. I am the owner of this commercial property," I explained, gesturing to my building. "And I did not give permission for anyone to use my parking lot. My business opens in an hour and I need these spaces for customers." The woman's expression shifted from confusion to slight annoyance. "Well, Karen Thompson said it was all arranged. She is the HOA president. You should talk to her if there is some misunderstanding. She is over by the grills." I scanned the crowd and spotted a group gathered around several smoking barbecues that had been set up against my building's wall, creating not only a fire hazard, but also sending smoke directly toward my ventilation system. At their center stood a woman in a crisp white pantsuit, gesturing emphatically as she appeared to be directing the placement of additional tables. As I made my way across my own parking lot, having to weave through clusters of strangers who gave me curious looks, I documented everything with my phone camera. 7 years of dealing with this particular homeowners association had taught me the importance of evidence. The Maple Creek HOA had a reputation throughout our small town, and not a positive one. "Excuse me," I said as I approached the woman in white. "Are you Karen Thompson? I need to speak with you about this event." She turned, assessing me with a quick up and down glance. "Yes, I am the HOA president. Is there a problem?" "I am the owner of Phoenix Auto Detailing. This is my private commercial property, and I did not authorize anyone to use my parking lot for this or any event. I have customers arriving soon, and I need these vehicles moved immediately." Karen's smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened. "We have always used this area for community events. It has never been an issue before." "That is not true," I countered, keeping my voice steady. "I have sent multiple letters to your HOA after previous incidents, clearly stating that this is private property and not available for neighborhood use without explicit permission." She waved her hand dismissively. "Those spaces sit empty most weekends anyway. We are just making good use of available resources. The previous owner understood the importance of community relations." I have owned this property for 7 years, and I have never agreed to this arrangement, I said, feeling my frustration build. This is not HOA property. You have no jurisdiction here. Karen's smile disappeared entirely. Listen, we have 75 families here today. The event has already begun. You cannot possibly expect us to relocate now. Perhaps you should have raised this concern earlier. Earlier, I received no notification this was happening, not a request, not a courtesy call, nothing. I gestured to the entire scene. This is trespassing, plain and simple. Her expression darkened. I am trying to be reasonable here. Why not take the day off? Your business will survive one Saturday, or better yet, join us. Be a team player. This attitude is exactly why the board has had concerns about your property's impact on neighborhood values. I pulled out my property deed and tax documents from my folder. My property line is clearly established. This parking lot belongs to my business. These documents prove it. Karen barely glanced at the papers. We have been using this lot for years during special events, and that informal arrangement continues regardless of what your papers say. The community's needs outweigh one business owner's inconvenience. I noticed several people watching our exchange, including 3 men wearing matching Maple Creek HOA board polo shirts who had moved closer, creating a united front behind Karen. I am asking politely for you to announce that this is private property and that all vehicles need to be moved, I said, making one final attempt at diplomacy. Karen turned to one of the men behind her. David, could you please turn up the music? I can hardly hear the announcements over all this noise. As the music volume increased, drowning out any possibility of further conversation, Karen turned her back on me and walked away, leaving me standing alone in my own parking lot, surrounded by trespassers who had been told they had every right to be there. I returned to my office, hands shaking with a combination of anger and disbelief. This was far from the first incident with the Maple Creek HOA, but it was certainly the most brazen. Looking out my window at the growing crowd, memories of previous violations flooded back. There was the time HOA members had cut through my property so regularly they had created an actual dirt path along the side of my building, despite my no trespassing signs. After one particularly heavy rain, the foot traffic had caused drainage issues that cost me thousands to repair. Then there was the community yard sale they had hosted in my lot without permission 3 years ago, leaving behind so much trash that I had spent an entire Sunday cleaning up before Monday business. When I had sent a cleaning bill to the HOA, Karen had responded with a letter suggesting I should be grateful for the exposure their event had brought to my little business. The most infuriating incident had occurred just 6 months ago, when I had received an official-looking notice of violations on HOA letterhead, claiming my business signage and industrial appearance were in violation of community standards. The letter had threatened daily fines if I did not comply with their aesthetic guidelines, despite the fact that they had absolutely no authority over my commercially zoned property. It had taken a strongly worded letter from my attorney to end that particular overreach. I had documented everything, sent registered letters establishing boundaries, even attended an HOA meeting to clearly explain that my property was not subject to their governance. All to no avail. The entitled behavior had continued, each incident seemingly bolder than the last. Today felt different, though. This was not just crossing a boundary. This was a deliberate takeover, a power play designed to establish once and for all that my property rights meant nothing when weighed against the HOA's desires. The message was clear. We will do as we please and you will accept it. I sat at my desk, considering my options. I could call the police to report trespassing, but I knew from previous minor incidents that they would be reluctant to get involved in what they would view as a neighborhood dispute. They would suggest I work it out civilly with the HOA. I could simply accept the loss of business for the day, but that would only reinforce the message that my property was available whenever the HOA decided they wanted it. This was about more than one day's revenue. It was about establishing whether I actually had control over my own commercial property. I opened my laptop and reviewed local trespassing laws, confirming what I already knew about my rights as a property owner. Then I reviewed my property deed once more, paying special attention to the clearly defined boundaries. There was no easement, no shared use agreement, nothing that gave the Maple Creek HOA any legal right to my parking lot. After years of reasonable attempts at resolution, I knew that sometimes the only language bullies understand is a decisive demonstration of consequences. I picked up my phone and made the first call. "Hello, is this Thompson Legal Services? This is Phoenix Auto Detailing. I would like to speak with Richard Thompson about an urgent property matter." Richard had been my attorney for years, handling everything from my business contracts to property issues. He answered within minutes when his secretary transferred the call. "I have a situation," I explained, detailing the unauthorized block party currently occupying my entire parking lot. "Have you explicitly asked them to leave?" Richard asked. Yes, I spoke directly with the HOA president. She dismissed my concerns and refused to relocate the event. "Then you are within your rights to have unauthorized vehicles removed from your property," he confirmed. "Document everything, post clear notices, and contact the police department to inform them of the situation to prevent misunderstandings." "Thank you, Richard. That confirms my understanding." The next call was to the local police department's non-emergency line, where I explained the situation and my intended course of action. The dispatcher noted the information and promised to alert officers in the area about the potential for complaints. Then came the calls to towing companies. I knew from experience that a single tow truck would be too slow for the number of vehicles present and would likely face significant resistance. This situation called for overwhelming response. Mountain View Towing? This is Phoenix Auto Detailing. I have approximately 25 vehicles trespassing on my commercial property and need immediate removal services. I explained the situation in detail, offering premium rates for immediate service. The dispatcher seemed hesitant about the number of vehicles involved, until I confirmed I had already consulted my attorney and notified local police. I repeated this process with 4 additional towing companies across the city, carefully coordinating their arrival times. While I waited, I printed large, unauthorized vehicles will be TOWED AT owner's expense notices and posted them prominently around the property, documenting this process with time-stamped photos and video. From my office window, I could see the party continuing unabated. The bouncy castle now had a line of children waiting their turn, and someone had set up a volleyball net across my newly resurfaced parking area. I checked my watch. My business should have been open for 30 minutes already, and I had received 3 calls from regular customers confused about the festivities blocking their access. I decided to give Karen one final opportunity to address the situation. Making my way back through the crowd, I found her at a table that had been designated as an information booth, based on the handwritten sign. "Karen, I need to speak with you urgently," I said, keeping my voice professional despite my simmering frustration. She looked up with undisguised annoyance. "I thought we had resolved this. As I explained, the community is using this space today. You have no right to use my property without permission, which was never granted. I am asking you one final time to announce that this is private property and that all vehicles need to be moved immediately." Karen stood up, smoothing her pantsuit. "We will be done when we are done. If you continue to disrupt our community event, I will have no choice but to document your harassment. The board will not look favorably on this kind of hostile behavior toward your neighbors." As I walked away, I sent a single group text to all 5 towing companies. "Proceed with removal operations. I will meet you at the property line." Returning to my office, I gathered my documentation and stepped outside just as the first tow truck appeared at the east entrance to my parking lot. Within minutes, 4 more trucks approached from different directions, executing the coordinated operation we had planned. I stood at the property line, property deed and trespassing notices in hand, directing the tow operators to specific vehicles, starting with those blocking the main entrance to my business. The party continued for several minutes before anyone noticed what was happening, the music drowning out the initial sounds of vehicles being hooked up for removal. The first indication that something was amiss came when a man ran through the crowd, shouting and pointing toward the west side of the lot where his SUV was already secured to a tow truck preparing to pull away. Like a wave, attention spread across the gathering as more people began noticing the systematic removal of vehicles. Karen pushed through the crowd, her white pantsuit now showing signs of distress. Her face flushed red with anger as she stormed toward me. "What do you think you are doing?" she demanded, her voice rising above the confused murmurs of the crowd. I maintained a calm demeanor. "I am having unauthorized vehicles removed from my private property, as is my legal right after providing notice." I pointed to the prominently displayed towing signs. "Your failure to respect my property rights and repeated refusal to relocate your event has led to this necessary action. You cannot do this. There are families here. Children," she sputtered, looking frantically at the tow trucks now removing vehicles at an impressive pace. "I asked you multiple times to move your event. You chose to ignore a reasonable request from the legal property owner," I replied, holding up my property documentation. "These are the consequences of that decision." "I will sue you for this," Karen threatened, pulling out her phone. "This is outrageous. The HOA will take legal action immediately." "You are welcome to consult with your attorneys," I responded, handing her my lawyer's business card. "But I have documented every step of this process, including your explicit acknowledgement that you knew this was private property and chose to use it anyway without permission. I believe the legal term for that is willful trespassing." The crowd around us had grown as more people realized what was happening. Some were rushing to move their vehicles before the tow trucks reached them, creating a chaotic scene of revering cars and frantic searches for keys. Others were confronting the tow operators, who calmly explained they were legally removing unauthorized vehicles from private property. One of the HOA board members in matching polo shirts approached, his expression significantly less confident than earlier. "You have made your point. Call off the tow trucks and we will start moving everyone." "I did try that approach earlier," I replied. That option is no longer available. Vehicles already hooked up will be removed. Within 30 minutes, the operation had transformed the scene entirely. Over 20 vehicles had been removed, their owners provided with information about which tow yard they could retrieve them from, after paying the substantial fees. The festive atmosphere had dissolved into clusters of stranded attendees trying to arrange alternative transportation. Tables were being hastily packed up, the bouncy castle deflated, and the DJ equipment disassembled. From my office window, I watched as the block party disintegrated into disorder. Karen was surrounded by angry residents, many gesturing wildly or pointing at their phones, presumably displaying the costs they would incur to retrieve their vehicles. The unified front of HOA leadership had splintered, with board members now standing apart, engaged in what appeared to be heated individual discussions. Several residents approached my office directly. I braced for confrontation, but surprisingly, many expressed understanding once they learned the full context. One woman apologized profusely, explaining that the HOA newsletter had explicitly stated that arrangements had been made for parking at the adjacent business property. "We had no idea this was unauthorized," she admitted. Karen assured everyone at the last meeting that there was a long-standing agreement with local businesses for community events. Others shared similar stories, revealing a pattern of misrepresentation by the HOA leadership that had left many innocent homeowners facing significant towing fees based on false assurances. As the crowd continued to disperse, I noticed 3 HOA board members approaching my office entrance. They requested a private conversation, and I invited them inside, keeping my door open and my phone recording on the desk. Lessons learned from previous interactions. "We would like to propose a solution," the oldest member began, placing a hastily printed document on my desk. "The HOA is prepared to pay for any cleanup and damages to your parking lot if you will consider releasing the vehicles as a gesture of goodwill." I reviewed their proposal, noting it contained no admission of wrongdoing, no commitment to respect property boundaries in the future, and included language suggesting this was a one-time courtesy on their part. "I appreciate your offer," I replied, sliding the paper back across my desk. "But there will be no intervention on my part regarding the towed vehicles. Actions have consequences, and this lesson about property rights and proper authorization was long overdue. This will create significant hardship for many families," another board member argued. "A hardship created by your HOA's deliberate misrepresentation," I countered. "Had your leadership been honest with residents about the lack of permission to use this property, they could have made informed decisions. Instead, they were misled, and now they are facing the consequences of your board's actions." The board members departed without further argument, their expressions suggesting they knew I was right, despite their reluctance to admit it publicly. In the days that followed, the tow-away showdown became the talk of the town. Local social media groups buzzed with heated discussions, opinions sharply divided between those who saw me as the villain who ruined a community tradition and those who recognized the HOA's pattern of overreach and entitlement. An emergency HOA meeting was called for the following Wednesday evening. Though not a resident, I received dozens of messages from homeowners sharing details about the contentious gathering. Karen faced significant backlash as residents demanded the association cover their towing fees, creating a budget crisis that would require either a special assessment or dramatic cuts to planned community improvements. The most damaging revelation came when internal HOA emails were shared publicly by a disillusioned board member. These communications clearly showed that the leadership had discussed the lack of permission for using my property 3 weeks before the event. One particularly damning email from Karen stated, "He has complained before but has never taken action. He will not dare tow so many vehicles and create a scene. Better to ask forgiveness than permission in this case." This evidence of calculated disregard for property rights and willful misrepresentation to community members caused immediate upheaval within the HOA. 3 board members resigned in embarrassment, publicly apologizing for their role in the deception. Residents began organizing to demand new leadership, transparency measures, and ethical guidelines for HOA operations. Local business owners reached out to express their support, many sharing their own stories of boundary violations and entitled behavior from the same HOA. The owner of a nearby restaurant revealed that he had faced similar issues before installing an expensive gate system to prevent unauthorized parking, a measure I was now considering myself. 2 weeks after the incident, the community landscape had transformed dramatically. An emergency election had been held, and Karen Thompson had been voted out as HOA president, replaced by Michael Chen, a retired attorney who had been vocally critical of the previous leadership's approach to community governance. On a quiet Monday morning, Michael visited my business, not to make demands, but to deliver a formal written apology from the new board, and to request a meeting to establish clear written agreements for any future community needs. "What happened was inexcusable," he acknowledged. "Property rights are fundamental, and the previous board's disregard for legal boundaries put homeowners in an untenable position. We want to reset this relationship on a foundation of mutual respect and proper procedures." Over the following month, we negotiated a formal contract that included fair compensation for any authorized use of my property, with stringent penalties for violations. The new HOA leadership implemented mandatory ethics training for board members and established transparency measures requiring all decisions to be clearly communicated to homeowners with supporting documentation. The most surprising development came from the community itself. Several residents stopped by my business to offer personal apologies, some bringing small gifts or handwritten notes. Many became loyal customers, expressing their respect for someone who stood firm against the entitled behavior that had plagued their community for years. My business actually saw an increase in revenue in the months following the incident, as the story spread and brought new curiosity customers who then became regulars. The expense of the towing operation had been a calculated risk that ultimately paid dividends beyond just establishing boundaries. 6 months later, I observed a smaller, properly permitted community event happening in the appropriate public space adjacent to the neighborhood. Clear signage directed residents to designated parking areas, and not a single car entered my lot, evidence that sometimes hard lessons are the most effective teachers of respect. Standing at my office window, watching families enjoy their community gathering within proper boundaries, I reflected on how establishing those boundaries had ultimately benefited everyone. The HOA now operated with transparency and accountability. My business rights were respected, and the community had shed the toxic leadership that had created unnecessary conflict. Sometimes, I realized, the most powerful response to entitlement is not endless accommodation or seething frustration, but a clear demonstration that actions have consequences. In standing firm against years of escalating boundary violations, I had not just protected my property rights, but had ultimately contributed to creating a more respectful community, one that understood that true neighborly relations are built on mutual respect, not unilateral demands. As I turned away from the window to help a customer, I noticed the framed copy of the negotiated agreement with the HOA hanging on my wall beside my business license. A reminder that boundaries, properly established and defended, create the foundation for all healthy relationships, whether personal or community-wide.